on to owners for just a second. And I want to talk owners, and then I'm going to bring Mitch on, but I want to talk owners just for a second. And I want to talk about Jim Barnett. It's really because he was somebody that for years was the man in professional wrestling. There was no one any bigger than Jim Barnett in the professional wrestling business. And this was what, and I'm talking, these are the guys that came in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and there was a change of ownership that came up later on, but this was the core thing about owners back then. If Jim Barnett saw something, like, for instance, Tommy Rich was his lead babyface for many years. I mean, for years in Georgia Championship Wrestling, from probably 78 until 83, and until Barnett was read out of there. But he was his lead person. And this is what he would say. Let's say he had a program with a superstar at Drew, and then the next time he had a program with Ken Patera. So Ken Patera was there, and it wasn't drawn with Tommy Rich and Ken Patera. Yeah. So Jim Barnett comes up to Dad. He said, "My boy, we're going to have to get rid of Ken Patera." He says, "Well, it ain't drawing Tommy Rich on it yet." He think, "Yeah, but he did draw. He did draw. So let's get rid of Kenny Patera." And I can't remember who was booking at the time. And I know they told him, quit putting Ken Patera in the matches with Tommy Rich. And they didn't do it. And they were also fired along with Ken Patera. That was the ownership of the companies then. It didn't have nothing to do whether they liked you, whether they were your friend. It had to whether or not you could put butts in those seats. And if you couldn't, I don't care what. If Tommy Rich could not have put people in them seats, no matter what people have said about Tommy Rich and Jim Barnett, never happened. We were there. That never happened. That never took place. He didn't get the world title shot because of that. They were just trying to give Georgia a boost to help it draw. It had nothing to do with anything, and they knew it was going to happen. All the NWA people knew it was happening. Dad drove down with the Harley race that night. All that stuff, everybody knew. The wrestlers did. No wrestler knew it. The only people who knew it was Harley Race and my dad, and Tommy only knew it that night. He didn't know it ahead of time that he was going to get the title. He knew it that night. So, but do you think that owners today, and maybe Vince does this, does he ever look at what's going on in the arenas when the arenas were run? Does he go to the arenas, or does he have anybody he sends to the arenas to look at the matches and say, "Hey, Joe's getting over"? Because Jim Barnett would do that. He would say, "Oh my boy, that Jerry Roberts is getting over a little bit." Is there no one there that watches the matches go back to Vince?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you do. You've got those producers that they hire, and that's their job, to critique. And I'm sure they have forms to fill out or whatever, But I don't think Vince is quite as involved as he once was. I think he's been pulling back a lot more lately. But I tell you who's involved, and that's Triple H. Now, he watches everything from that NXT product, but he's also starting to fill in a lot of those, because Vince has missed a lot of Raw and SmackDown tapes this year. And Triple H is sitting in that position. And he pays attention. Because here's the difference. Vince was never a wrestling fan. Vince knew you could make money at wrestling, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Triple H is a fan. He always has been. He loves old school. And if you watch the product, you see the difference between NXT in that regard and what, the main WWE shows are like. So, yeah, I mean, they're watched. I don't think they're paid as much attention to at this point, but I think that's going to change the more Triple H becomes, even more ingrained in being the voice behind the curtain over time. So,
because back in the territory days, they would see a guy on that first match and they go, "Okay, he needs to go to the second match," and then they'd be in the booking committee and say, "Okay, he needs to go to the third match," and before you know it, that's how Tommy Rich got there. Tommy Rich didn't get there because he got there because they watched how the people reacted to him. And that's the reason he got to that point that he got to, because otherwise they wouldn't have gave him a chance. If people were just sitting there on their thumbs and going to the concession stand. I remember Jacques Rougeau He was wrestling in Southeastern Championship Wrestling, and we really didn't mean to do this. We were just telling the truth. But he was going against a guy named Vic Raines at the time, Southeastern Championship Wrestling, maybe 1983. And he came to us after the match. He rode with us. We were living in Pensacola at the time. He came back to us. He said, hey, boys, how was my match tonight? And we said, oh, man, I don't know how your match was. I was in the line at the concession stand. And Dad looked over at him and said, well, I guess that tells you what your match was like. You know, I'll never forget that. And I don't think it was Jacques Rougeau's fault. I think Vic Raines just wasn't going to get over it. Paul Hatchett, if all three people in the ring, referee and wrestlers, do their job, it'll get over. And fans come back. Without fans, wrestling is nothing. You are correct. There has been we have told this and told wrestlers over and over again in our lifetimes, without those people sitting in that crowd, you are nothing. And I think it does help to be a wrestling fan first before you get into wrestling business, before you're a wrestler, because if not, you really don't understand the wrestling business. You don't understand why I'm doing this to do this. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're a WWE wrestler, I'm telling you, you're just doing what you're told, and we understand. But if you're on an independent level, you really need to go back, watch old wrestling tapes, and do it that way first. Learn how to do it that way first. And then when you get to WWE, it doesn't matter, because you're going to spend 3 years in the developmental place anyway. So they're going to reteach you everything, but at least you'll know the basics of wrestling. And if you want to be taught how to wrestle good, Tom Pritchard has a school, and that's where you need to go to learn professional wrestling, because there's no doubt he can do that. Let me ask Jack this question: and is there a time in WWE today, and I don't keep up with it as much as Jack does, but can they get heat on television now?
They can, but it's not like what we used to do. And that's because wrestling in general, not just WWE, I'm not pointing finger at them, but wrestling in general has turned to the cool heels. You know, I really think that started with WCW and the NWO. That was cool. It was. I bought into it too. But I think we lost that element along the way. And I think that's one thing that's really missing. I will give AEW props, because they've got this guy, MJF. Is that what he goes by? Now that's a heel.
Maxwell Jacob Friedman.
That's one of the best heels I have seen in 20 years.
Now,
he does not like anybody. And 24 hours a day, I don't care where you see him at, and there's videos posted of where he does appearances, you know, he'll make kids cry.
He lives it.
I mean,
there's a difference between heat and the wrong kind of heat. We used to tell Paulie Dangerously when he was in Continental, we'd say the heat you're trying to get is the wrong kind of heat. Anyone can get that heat, which was called cheap heat. Yeah. Cheap heat is getting on the mic, and I've seen this done on a lot of independent levels, and get on there and say, "You rednecks." Well, anybody can say that.
Yeah.
Now let us show you how to get that heat in the match without calling anybody any names. And you won't, really and truly, a heel wants everyone to love them. They're doing nothing wrong. A true heel does not believe he's done anything wrong. Everything he did because he had to do it.
A true heel is justified in his actions.
Yes.
Your daddy told me that.
and that's the way it should always be. If you cheat, you need to run out of there like you have stole the keys to your grandma's car and you're going to go and leave somewhere. If you've cheated in that match, you need to leave that match right then and there. Don't wait for it. You know, you wouldn't steal something at a store and just stay around outside. You would leave. And that's the way we Dad always said, listen, tonight you're going to do the deal where we're going to take the belt off of you. But when you hit that, whatever you're doing with, you get out of there, because I want you to run out of that building. And I think that's a lost thing now. People cheat and they'll stay there for the next 25 minutes. And everybody's got to go to that second or top rope.
Yeah.
I'd outlaw that. The first time, if I was in WWE, I said, not one person goes to that except for the 2 or 3 people we tell to do it, because It's done every match. Every match it is done. And and at least once they're going to do a flying out of the ring onto somebody. At least once in every match they're going to do it. I'm getting a little behind on people really quick. Let me try to pick up on the people here. I remember Norvell Austin working back in the 70s, Knoxville. He could walk out with some heat with Don Carson. Well, Don Carson was a heat getter. Did y'all ever get to see him?
Yeah,
A little bit.
saw some tapes. I never saw him in person.
He could get heat not only for the fans, but the wrestlers as well. No, Don was a good guy. I have to say Don was a guy. He was from our home.